This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Welcome, America, to Balancing Act, the show that aims to tame the political circus of two-party politics. I'm John Katko. This week, we're talking tariffs. We'll speak with history professor Dr. Wender Cohen about this taxing issue. Then, we'll put two experts of trade law and policy on the trapeze to balance the risks and rewards of the Trump administration's tariff policy. Then I'll share my take. Finally, Bloomberg's Elisa Parenti gives us a lowdown on what's coming up next week in Washington. But first, let's take a walk on the tightrope. We've heard the word tariff a lot lately, and I mean a lot. Before we dive into the issue, some of you may be asking, what on earth is a tariff? In short, a tariff is a tax set by the government on certain imports or exports. It may also be President Trump's most used word this year.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Then I was reprimanded by the fake news. They said, what about love, religion, and God? I said, I agree. Let's put God number one. Let's put religion number two. Love, I don't know. We got to put that number three, I guess, right? And then it's tariff.
No question, the president loves tariffs. He believes they are a key tool in the nation's economic and foreign policy. Others, not so much.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal. But Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Tariffs are not a new idea. The U.S. has been setting tariffs since its inception. Just ask George Washington. Tariffs now comprise about 2% of the U.S. revenue. But in those early years, they once accounted for a whopping more than 90% of it. However, tariffs can also have negative impacts. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, for example, enacted after the stock market crash in 1929, significantly raised import duties, sparking retaliatory tariffs from trading partners that many believed contributed to the economic turbulence of the 1930s. After World War II, the U.S. shifted away from these protectionist policies. This period saw the rise of international trade agreements aimed at reducing tariffs, such as the GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. In 1962, JFK supported the Trade Expansion Act, and Ronald Reagan pursued policies to reduce many tariffs. Enter NAFTA in 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, which aimed to eliminate tariffs between these countries. While the agreement had its perks, like cheaper goods and a boost in exports, it also led to manufacturing jobs leaving the United States in big numbers. The United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA for short, replaced NAFTA in 2020 and aimed for a more balanced trade environment. Today, President Trump feels things are anything but balanced, despite the fact that his administration was the author of the USMCA. His use of tariffs go beyond economics, using these policies to achieve goals such as incentivizing governments to accept deportations and preventing fentanyl from crossing the border. So far, it's led to a burgeoning trade war and market uncertainty, enough to drive Wall Street to drink. But don't buy that French wine because Trump's threatened a 200% tariff on it. Are such sweeping tariffs really beautiful? Well, as they say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In this case, the tariff holder. Perhaps we can find some balance in the center ring. Joining me in the center ring to riff on tariffs is Syracuse University history professor, Dr. Wender Cohen. Welcome, Professor.
Hi, John.
Thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate it, and let's get right at it. Right off the bat, I got to wonder what Trump and his administration is contemplating with tariffs. The question is it legal?
Well, it may not be legal. historically, the power to create tariffs rested with the United States Congress. But we saw that during the New Deal period, that began shifting. Congress delegated that power to the president. That said, the power rested with the president to negotiate agreements. It didn't necessarily rest with him to be able to institute tariffs on a day-to-day basis the way he is now.
Okay, so it remains an open question how far he's going to go, but like other things, it's likely, is it not, that these will be tested in the courts?
Absolutely, it'll be tested in the courts. The reality is that there are a whole range of different things that the Trump administration is doing that may not be consistent with the constitutional list of powers. Which powers rest with the United States Congress, which rest with the executive, et cetera.
So we spoke at the beginning of the show about how much tariffs played a part in the early part of our country, 90% tariff rate, and now towards revenue. Now it's about 2%. How did that happen? How did that come about?
Well, in the early period, the United States was trying to develop manufacturing. They were separating themselves from the mother country, England. Moreover, it was the only way for them to raise revenue was through import duties and by imposts on things like tobacco and alcohol. So for most of the 19th century, revenue was generated by these kinds of duties. We begin seeing that in the Civil War period, the United States needs a much larger government. The early America didn't even have a navy. So once you have more demand for revenue, you begin seeing them experimenting with things like an income tax, which is much better at raising revenue. Moreover, by the 20th century, the United States has much more developed industry, and there's a sense that we don't need to have protective tariffs to try and shield American infant industries from foreign competition.
All right, so what were the reasons over time that tariffs were used? You mentioned some of them, obviously to develop manufacturing, but what were some of the other reasons tariffs were imposed?
Oh, there were a whole range of reasons. Some of the reasons had to do with promoting manufacturing, protecting what were called infant industries. In some cases, in the biggest case, it was used to raise revenue for the United States federal government. It was the main source of revenue until the Civil War. But there's also a moral issue. Sometimes they would impose high tariffs on things like opium or on alcohol or on tobacco because these were things that were frowned upon. They didn't abolish those things in the United States in the 19th century, but they did put very high tariffs, 100% tariffs on things like opium.
Okay, so what do you think the goal of the administration is now? It seems like there's a foreign policy component, there's an economic component, and maybe some other components. So why don't you tell us, based on what you've seen of the Trump administration's goals, what it is he's trying to accomplish?
Well, I think there's a political component, which is that he wants to project nationalism against globalism. Trump believes that the United States is getting cheated by its allies, and he really doesn't believe in the idea of a win-win agreement. And so he wants our allies to come and bend the knee and make concessions. He wants to project strength and use tariffs to do that. But there's also the policy angle. He would like the United States to develop more manufacturing, to draw international investment, and he sees tariffs as a tool for that. He'd like the United States to begin replacing the income tax with tariffs as a source of revenue. That's very difficult because tariffs really can't generate quite that much revenue, the revenue we need to run the government. And third, I suppose he probably wants to annex Canada, since he said it many times. Now, scholars will tell you that none of those things are likely to happen. We're not going to draw back manufacturing necessarily. We aren't going to annex Canada. We aren't going to be able to replace the income tax. But he's the president and we're not.
So if the goal is to protect U.S. industry as part of this program, is this the best way to do it, is to have tariffs in other countries to try and incentivize manufacturing to come back home?
I sort of believe that the better way is to have targeted subsidies of the type that the Biden administration sponsored, the CHIPS Act. That meant that you were focusing on specific industries that you wanted to develop that were essential for the supply chain, essential for military. What Trump is doing is much more brute force, much more blunt, and much more personal. Again, the key is to do things in a systematic, predictable fashion. the problem with the Trump administration is that it's all about Trump. It's all about his decisions of who's naughty and who's nice on any given day. And so it's become very difficult for the market to predict whether or not tariffs are going to be high or low in 6 months. And that's made it very difficult for them to do business planning. So if you were a building contractor, you would find it very difficult to project the cost of your future construction because you wouldn't know the cost of Canadian lumber.
So let's take reciprocal tariffs, which are due to go into effect on April 2nd. And that is, if you're taxing our product, we're going to tax your product with a tariff. So isn't that just leveling the playing field? Isn't that a sense of fairness there?
The way to think of it is that all of the agreements that bind the United States with regard to trade were negotiated. That means that in order for the United States to convince some country to lower their tariff barriers, the United States had to go into a negotiation, and they may not have been able to get to parity. And Trump may not be able to get to parity. Countries may say, well, we just won't accept that. That's not good for us. We're not in the same position you're in. So yes, on some level, it's about fairness, but on another level, it's about, well, what can you actually get in a negotiation? What can you, what kind of agreement can you hammer out? And what this may result in is a lot of enemies abroad, people who are no longer trading with the U.S., no longer see the United States as having common interests.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen.
All right, thank you.
Now, let's put tariffs and a couple of experts in trade law on the trapeze. Joining us to take a swing at the rationale and risk of using tariffs as part of U.S. policy, our former chief agricultural negotiator for the United States Trade Representative, Ambassador Darci Vetter, and former general counsel of the Office of the United States Trade Representative, Mr. Warren Maruyama. Briefly, you both worked for different administrations. So, Ambassador, which administration did you work for?
I was the chief agriculture negotiator in the Obama administration.
And Mr. Maruyama?
Bush 41 and Bush 43.
Thank you both for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right to it. Mr. Maruyama, let's start with you. Why is Trump using tariffs in the manner he did, particularly given the way that he negotiated the USMCA? What's changed over the last 4 years in his mind?
Well, he's always been convinced that tariffs are a great tool, and so he's using them for just about everything: fentanyl, illegal immigration, reciprocity. But, you know, he's very enthusiastic about tariffs, and this goes back decades.
I want to kind of dig down on it a little bit more. Ambassador, tariffs, good or bad?
Well, tariffs are one tool you can use, and so they aren't inherently good or bad necessarily, but the broad application of tariffs across the economy really will raise costs for U.S. consumers and will create a lot of changes in supply chain, contingency planning, lots of, again, raising prices for consumers, but also raising costs for businesses generally. So tariffs are a tempting tool because they're really strong mechanisms. They change prices immediately, but they're also a really blunt instrument in that they actually damage people on both sides of the transaction, both the seller of the good who suddenly has the tariff attached to their good, but also the buyer too, who now has to figure out what to do to pay those tariffs. Do they increase prices to consumers? Do they lower their profits? Do they go elsewhere?
Mr. Maruyama, with respect to the current economic environment, higher interest rates right now, and the economy is still trying to figure out where it's going. What impact right now do you think it's going to have on this economy?
Tariffs have upsides and downsides. And the downsides are inflation, because a tariff is basically a tax. It's just a specialized tax on imports. So that's going to drive up inflation. It's going to drive up costs for U.S. manufacturers. It'll mean at least our exports, since a lot of them contain imported inputs, aren't going to be as competitive. But the other big downside of tariffs is retaliation, because the trade rules are basically a veneer over law of the jungle. And if we raise our tariffs, the foreigners are going to raise their tariffs on our stuff. And then you have basically a trade war. And that particularly has costs for American agriculture, since it's heavily export dependent, and our three biggest export markets are China, Mexico, and Canada.
I understand, other countries may retaliate against us, but what about the other countries who right now have tariffs on some of our goods we ship to them, but we don't have tariffs on some of the same goods or similar goods shipped to us? Is that fair?
Well, the way that it works is reciprocity in a very broad sense, where we make a calculation that the foreigners are reducing tariffs on the stuff that's really important to us, and we lower our tariffs on stuff that's not important to us, not that important to us, or we don't make. So in a general sense, the system is reciprocal, but we have high tariffs on a lot of things too. Milk, sugar, textiles, some light trucks. So, it all, in the end, the calculation in the past has been that it balances out.
So, Ambassador, I believe you grew up on a farm, is that right?
I did, yes.
So I want to kind of drill into the agricultural aspect of this and the impact on agriculture and tariffs. I think you mentioned that, or Mr. Maruyama did. What impact do tariffs have on agriculture, and what about it with this current presidency, how it's going to impact agriculture?
So far, this America First trade policy that we're seeing is really focused on industries that are dependent on or are competing with imports. But as Warren already mentioned, agriculture is really dependent on exports. So 20% of U.S. agricultural production is exported, about 1 in 3 acres of what we grow. And as Warren also noted, that makes us a tempting target for retaliation. So when we place tariffs on other countries' products, they tend to retaliate with tariffs on U.S. agriculture. And so what tariffs are doing to farmers is really squeezing them in the middle. They're seeing increased prices from steel and aluminum and other tariffs on their inputs, fertilizer, parts, irrigation equipment, etc. And then seeing that their exports can't compete because they have tariffs attached to them when they go into foreign markets. So U.S. agriculture is really sort of stuck in this place where they're getting hit from both sides.
Now, Mr. Maruyama, a quick question for you. We haven't talked about this, but what about the foreign policy component of tariffs? For example, Mexico. I was a federal organized crime prosecutor, and the amount of drugs coming across the border was insane, and the human trafficking as well. Aren't tariffs available use to stop that flow of drugs coming across in America and illegal aliens coming across in America?
Yeah, they are probably up to a point. But one thing about tariffs is they're really going after some of our best allies and trading partners. And another thing is, even with Mexico, while we may be very unhappy about the level of illegal immigration, particularly over the last 4 years, we do need Mexico's cooperation in stopping the flow of immigrants from Central America up to our southern border. And so, you may use it as an attention getter with Mexico, but if you take it too far, you lose that Mexican cooperation, and then probably immigration gets worse.
Ambassador, here's another question for you, and that is, manufacturing jobs left the United States for a simple reason. They were cheaper to do it overseas. So if you bring it back to the United States, and we keep hearing the argument that short-term pain, long-term gain, but if American labor is cheaper and is more expensive rather than American manufacturing is more expensive, doesn't that mean that long-term we're going to have higher prices overall for industries that we bring back home?
Well, I think it raises the question of whether tariffs will, in fact, bring back manufacturing in all sectors. I certainly see the goal in things like semiconductors, advanced chips, certain green technologies. Despite the changes in the policy of this administration, I think we will continue to see more use of solar and wind and other types of energy, and we don't want to be fully dependent on other countries for those. But what point in that manufacturing process will the United States specialize? To what extent do we bring back that manufacturing? Do we need to be self-sufficient? Do we just need to have a firm grounding so that we're not totally dependent on other countries? But yes, it may raise prices. And, I think a question too is we're focused on the border part of that policy now, but are we focused on the worker part of that policy now? We need good domestic policy to go with border policy and make sure we have workers who are prepared to participate in those industries as well in order to make that reshoring goal a success.
So, Ambassador, let's stick with you for a second. Switching gears a little bit. When you bring the jobs back home, and let's say the tariffs work and you bring the jobs back home, can you really produce in the United States at a level that keeps those costs down, or are they going to be inherently more expensive?
Well, labor costs certainly are higher in the United States, and that's something that to consider. I think we need also to build our domestic workforce and make sure that they are ready to accept those manufacturing jobs. But I think part of what we're seeing in the current trade conversation is that we're treating trade as though it's a series of bilateral relationships. And what we really know is that our supply chains are very complex, and that, the parts for one car we heard with the Canada and Mexico tariffs might cross multiple borders before that car is finished, right? We see the same thing with a lot of these other technologies. And so while I agree that we don't want to be totally dependent on foreign countries for the manufacture of important and strategic goods, be that steel and aluminum or advanced chips for AI, for example, there are very complex global supply chains that simply putting tariffs on and suggesting we might be self-sufficient because of that is, I think, a bit too simplistic of an answer.
Ambassador Wender, Mr. Maruyama, thank you both so much for a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the center ring, we heard from an expert who laid out the issue of tariffs for us. And then we swung into the trapeze and heard from individuals from both Democratic and Republican administrations that were experts in the field. And they gave us more insight. Now here's my insight, or my take. It's complicated. Tariffs are not an easy issue, and there's good arguments, pros and cons. For example, with respect to Mexico, we should put tariffs on Mexico until they secure the border and stop drugs from pouring over the border into our country and killing our individuals. And same with illegal aliens coming into our country. Secure the border and then take away the tariff. But after that, it gets more complicated, and there's much things taken into consideration. What's the economic impact to us short term? Will it send us into a recession? And even if we bring the jobs back, are the prices going to be higher long term? And if so, is it worth it? Those are all things that should be thought out on a long-term basis. There should be a lot of planning, and there should not have blanket tariffs as part of that. We should be more tactical. And I think, in the end, we should use an old parable from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Not too hot, not too cold, but just right. Let's get it right. Let's take the time to do it right, and with a lot of thought and a lot of expert advice. Dispense with whimsical stuff, dispense with personality conflicts, and let's get it right. Tariffs have a place in our country, but it needs to be done in the right way, not too much and not too little. That's my take. Joining us is Bloomberg's Elisa Prenti to fill us in on what's happening next week in Washington. Hey, Elisa, how are you?
Hey there. Well, we are very much focused on the tariffs and the tariff tantrum that we all saw happen over the last few months for the market. Now, increasingly, some adjustments that are being made. And as we're getting more certainty, it seems to have cooled things down a little bit. The rhetoric has also cooled down. Some of the accommodations that are being made for specific trading partners are helping us to understand what this relationship is going to look like into the spring, summer, and in the remainder of the Trump administration. And that is this word reciprocal. We keep coming back to that. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, it's been a theme that we have been hearing from him as a key Trump advisor, that whatever fees are being imposed on U.S. goods that are being sold overseas, we can expect that same exact number to be imposed on those goods that are going to be brought into the U.S. So the reciprocal nature, very much tit for tat, that clarity is going to serve the markets well, and also help us to understand a little bit as we map out and kind of try to track what's next on this tariffs front.
So how are folks at Bloomberg seeing the market going forward? What are they thinking?
Well, we're very much focused on interest rates and how is inflation going to be impacted by the tariffs, and if we're going to continue to see rising inflation or if it's going to cool at all. So we're tracking interest rates. With regard to the tariffs, the certainty that is coming out of the White House has helped. We've seen a little bit of a relief rally, Congressman, over the last, I'd say, week or so after that massive sell-off, and we saw the three averages slip into correction territory. That has abated, and as more guidance and more direction comes out of this White House, traders love that. They hate uncertainty, no secrets there. So I think we're going to see a more stable projection, although there are quite a few variables, not the least of which are interest rates.
You know, speaking of certainty, it seems like Elon Musk is defying gravity because everyone thought he'd be out of the administration by now, but it seems pretty certain he's going to be there for the long haul. And what implications does that have for the Republican Party and for Trump?
Well, the biggest one, I believe, is his pledge to help fund candidates in targeted House races. So President Trump very mindful of shoring up who he wants in that Congress for the post-midterms. And so very appreciative of an Elon Musk stepping up with his hundreds of millions of dollars to step in and fund those candidates that they want to see helping to put forth the Trump agenda. So that their relationship seems as close as ever. He continues to play a role in the cabinet, and he continues to be someone that Trump points to as an example of someone who, an investor who is investing in the U.S. with his Tesla and SpaceX factories, spending right here at home.
Lisa Parenti at Bloomberg News. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. To send in your comments for the show, visit WCNY.org/balancing act. For Balancing Act extras and exclusives, follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us, and remember, in the circus that is politics, there's always a balancing act. I'm John Katko. We'll see you next time, America.